everybody. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOPLP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9, and will also be available on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube station at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I'm just delighted to welcome back to the morning show Jason Ianuzzi, who's Artistic Director of the Cantemus Chamber Chorus, which was founded in 1982 and whose 41 members represent towns all over the North Shore. Today we'll be learning about their upcoming concert titled I Hear America Singing, Exploring the American Dream, which they'll perform on May 10th at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Beverly at 7:30 p.m., and again on May 11th at 4 p.m. here in Newburyport at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Jason joined Cantemus as Artistic Director in 2022, so it's been 3 years, Jason. In addition to a successful career in music and drama education, he brings to Cantemus a deep and varied background of choral conducting, vocal coaching, music direction, and an extensive knowledge of the choral orchestral repertoire. So first of all, Jason, welcome back, and thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show to talk about this timely and exciting sounding concert.
Thank you for having me here. I always enjoy sitting down and speaking with you, Mary.
Well, likewise, Jason, very much so. And I wanted to ask you, since it's been 3 years, and I think our first interview was when you had just started with Cantemus. So I wanted to ask you, before we get into the concert, I just wanted to check in with you about those 3 years and ask you, what have some of the highlights of your tenure with Cantemus to date been?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to name too many specific highlights. I would say it's been a wonderful first 3 years. We've gotten to know each other very well over these 3 years, and I'd say that something I've really enjoyed about the choir is that they've been very willing to go with me on a repertoire journey that sort of leans into their strategic plan. In the strategic plan, they had outlined a desire to expand their repertoire base, to include the Western canon, but to move beyond as well. Yeah. And also to do so in a way, in my estimation, that doesn't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're not saying that the DWM, the dead white men, shouldn't be. Because there's so much wonderful music, right? Such a tradition. But how can we connect with that tradition and also try some new things? And they've been very open to trying new things and new modes of expression. I think about back in the fall concert we had, we played around with the lighting a little bit, and we did a piece about a Japanese folk song about fireflies, and the women were flashing lights as fireflies, and that's challenging. That's like a whole other level of things that they haven't necessarily done before. And of course, not to be gimmicky, but to find ways to allow these additional modes of expression to enhance the concert experience for our audience. So I've been really thrilled that they've been willing to go along with me on some of these crazy journeys. And last season we performed Annalise, which is a very large, 70-minute single work for a concert. That's very unusual for Cantemus. And there was some resistance when I first announced the piece, because they thought, well, it's so sad, they're very alert about the audience experience. What's that going to be like as people walk away? But I assured them that there were a lot of hopeful moments, and I mean, that was a real sort of feather in our cap, and we really, I think, grew as a group and grew together as people. So I guess if I had to list a highlight, the highlight for me has been just literally forming the personal relationships with the choir.
Absolutely.
I think that enhances our music making, and they're just such wonderful, thoughtful people. It's great to make music with them.
Well, it sounds like it was a really good match, good karma that Cantemus and you found one another. And I was in the audience for that Annalise concert, and the adjective, and I still think about it, Jason, and the adjective I would use is transcendent for that piece. So there you go. Well, let's talk about the upcoming concert then on May 10th and 11th. What made you decide to make Exploring the American Dream the theme for this upcoming concert? And what are the questions about the American dream, or possibly dreams, plural, that you wanted to explore via music?
Yeah, thank you. I love that you use the idea of explore, because it's kind of a tricky topic. We're living in times where feelings are very high, and in our politics, whether you're winning or losing in politics right now, I think everyone can agree that we're in a pretty fractured state.
Yeah.
People are really going into various camps, and it's sometimes difficult to find those things that bond us together. And I think the concert kind of asked that question, like, what are the fundamental things that make us, quote unquote, American? And to be honest, and I hope my politics don't show too much, but I was really disturbed by a trend lately that folks on both sides of the political spectrum, in the extremes of left and right, really have been, in my estimation, weaponizing the symbols of freedom. Like, what's appropriate when it comes to the flag? What is the appropriate response when someone is singing the Star Spangled Banner? And so on. And I think something that's always made our country great is that people can have different answers to that question, and it doesn't make them. I believe truly it doesn't make them less patriotic. I think exploring questions is patriotic. That we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean? What are the values that hold us together? So. The concert is intended not to preach at people, and certainly not to tell anyone what to think. But I hope that it's going to invite folks in our audience into a conversation, into some reflection about where we are, which is a very charged moment, and think about where we've come from and the different ways people have thought about what it means to be American over time, and then maybe to dream a bit together about how we might move forward and become better through some of the difficulties that we're seeing today.
I can't think of a better approach or more important questions to be posing, and the phrase that goes through my mind is creating dialogue, peaceful and constructive dialogue. So,
absolutely.
Well, you were kind enough to share with me your program notes for the concert, Jason, and in those you talk about the concert exploring many facets of American mythology, which music can simultaneously reflect, shape, and question. And you discuss a lot of the themes that your program explores, and I hope that we could talk about a few of those themes today, paired with the music that you've chosen to express them. And I thought maybe we'd start with the theme of the American landscape, its vastness and its beauty.
Sure. I mean, think about America the Beautiful. It's a hymn to the beauty of America, the natural beauty of America, this very large country with all the varied landscape and so on. And I think that the lyric writer uses the beauty of the landscape as a metaphor for the potential beauty of the country. And she talks a lot about, that we're still moving. We're still trying to perfect our flaws. We're still trying to tread out a road forward. And this was written, I don't know what, 150 years ago or whatever. So I think it's really interesting that that idea is still relevant today. But you can't sing about the beauty, the natural beauty, without thinking about the counter to that, which is, asking ourselves, in what way do our policies toward the environment, toward renewable energies and so on and so forth, in what way did those uphold the beauty of the nation? In what way are maybe sacrificing that for a short-term gain? And again, we don't define that in the concert. We don't say, we need to be going all electric by 2050 or some kind of a specific agenda. But I think it just asks us to call back and reflect on these questions. And I think there's so many beautiful pieces that reflect the American landscape. I think about just the sonic quality, for instance, of some of the great orchestral works by Aaron Copland.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of idea that he defined in a way the American sound with very broad, expanse of very low tones, very high tones, and these melodies that soar and so on and so forth. So the pieces that we're exploring are a set of 4 pastorals by a Colorado-based composer named Cecil Effinger. And they really, he and his poet friend, Thomas Hornsby Farrell, use the imagery of the sort of glorified American West. And it kind of has a kind of country bumpkin feel. It's almost like Robert Frost poetry, but it belies a deeper meaning underneath. So essentially the 4 pieces are about the power of memory. And how objects or specific smells or specific landscapes or moments in history can imprint themselves in our mind. And I think that's really interesting because in other ways, the concert explores different moments in history, different landscapes, and so on. So they're just marvelous pieces, and the poetry is so rich. And I just think of them as like quintessentially American choral repertoire.
Oh, that sounds fascinating, Jason. I'm not familiar with them, and I can't wait. The next theme I wanted to explore was there are contrasting themes of America as an aspirational, the famous phrase, city upon a hill, a shining beacon of freedom and welcome. And there's also, in contrast to that, the perennial theme of America is the land of slavery. Many people call it our original sin, poverty for the working class, unequal rights from the country's founding based on race and gender and class. And then, in contrary to that, surges of protest always against those inequities in search of a more perfect union. So what are some of the works that you'll use to explore those contrasting themes, Jason?
Well, let me start by saying this, that we, in preparation for this concert, have had a lot of discussion, sort of open floor discussion in the choir. We had one night where the weather was an issue and we couldn't meet in person, so we went to we moved to the dreaded Zoom rehearsal and decided that was a good opportunity to pose some of these questions to each other and to see what people thought about where we're heading with this concert. So I have to say that although that was my brainchild, it really has been very much a group effort from members of the ensemble contributing ideas for texts to be read. Some of them have authored their own texts that are going to be read, and just some thoughts about probing questions that we wanted to ask ourselves. So, yeah, I mean, some of the pieces that we are singing connect to the American diaspora. So we have, in one moment, poetry of Langston Hughes being read, and in reaction to that poetry, we have the wonderful spiritual Deep River in a very classic arrangement. And again, it's a piece that Americans from all walks of life can relate to and understand and appreciate the beauty of the piece, but maybe forget about its connection to slavery, as you said, and the connection to the idea that life on this earth now is not perfect, but if we cross over this river to freedom, we may, and whether that's literal or metaphorical, like crossing over into the next life or whatever, there's a paradise awaiting. So I think that's interesting. You also mentioned the songs of protest. There's a whole period where we explore the ways music has been used to inflame and to impassion folks toward protest. And it's not that we're making a protest today, but reflecting on what people have done in the past. And hopefully the implication is clear that music gives us an opportunity. So we have a wonderful setting of Bread and Roses, which is a song from the Lawrence Bread and Roses strikes of 1912. Which was essentially a suffragette movement for equal pay and for better working hours. And it was actually the very first protest song, which was conceived as a march, because the law said to the letter, if you were to stand on the corner and protest, you could be arrested for loitering. Marching around the square,
you were safer.
You were safe from that. So it's a beautiful, it's a really nice arrangement, and makes us remember this history, which is actually local history as well.
Yeah.
We also have a performance of Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are Changin'," as performed by Peter, Paul, and Mary. Which is an ever timely text about mostly about the relationship of generations and how generations handled social change, and the tendency that youth really are impassioned and want to see things change faster than some of the older generations, and how do we move forward together. And there's even an opportunity to address in a way some of the questions swirling around immigration and immigration policy. Obviously huge right now. So we just very simply perform this wonderful a cappella setting of the Emma Lazarus poem, The New Colossus. And what I'll say is that as we talk to people, these right now in this moment in history, reading these poems and singing these texts, they hit in a very different way. We don't hear them as just something inscribed in stone that's in a history book, but as something where it feels like the ink is wet on the page, or that the dust is still settling in the stone, and it's really very relevant for today. And again, it's not telling people what to think about it, but just consider when Emma Lazarus wrote that poem and it was inscribed, at the Statue of Liberty, what that meant to people
Yeah.
around the world, with our country as literally a shining beacon, with the
Yeah.
torch and so on and so on. What kind of message are we sending now? And is there a way to reform our immigration
Yeah.
policy, be something sane and workable, but that doesn't necessarily close the door to folks who see America as their hope?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. Yeah.
These are some of the pieces that we explore in there. The music itself is just so varied that
Yeah.
even though it explores a particular topic, it's like a typical Cantemus concert, which I think really has something for everyone musically.
Yeah. Well, it sure sounds that way from everything you've described so far, and we haven't gotten to everything. Because I know another theme is works by great poets. You've mentioned Langston Hughes already, but I think there are others, poets that have tried to evoke and or shape the American spirit. So who are some of the great poets, in addition to Langston Hughes,
Sure.
that you...
It's very interesting. I had a vision of including. First of all, we opened the concert with the title song "I Hear America Singing," and it's a setting by the wonderful composer arranger Andre Thomas, and it's a kind of gospel pop setting, and it's very up, and it essentially, it's not all the text, but it references Walt Whitman's
Yeah.
favorite poem. He's sort of, in a way, the voice of America.
Yeah.
People think of him as the sort of quintessential American poet. It also quotes, as part of its material, an African American spiritual, "Walk Together, Children," which again has its idea of moving forward. So I thought it made a really nice opener to the concert. And kind of bookending that, later in the concert, we perform a rather angsty, rhythmic, driving, dissonant setting of beat, beat drums, which is also the Whitman text that he wrote during the Civil War, referencing the fact that no matter what walk of life you are from, no matter what your occupation, no matter what you're standing in life, the war is eventually going to reach you and impact you.
Yeah.
Very powerful setting, and I love it. And we have a classical guitarist who will be playing with us. And so we found some ways to include the classical guitar in other pieces. Not as obvious a connection was a piece by Ed Lundergan, who actually is the founding artistic director of Cantemus.
Oh.
And he reached out to me and said, "I have these pieces on text by Emily Dickinson. Would you be interested in any of them?" And he didn't know what our concert theme was. And I looked and I thought, oh, this one, I like this one. This one could work or whatever. But I hadn't really thought about how it might fit, except to say that it was by an American poet and could fit in the somewhere, because at that point it was still a nebulous idea. And the setting is a poem called "One Need Not Be a Chamber to Be Haunted." And Emily Dickinson says, it's not just the dark alleyways and the kind of spooky houses that have ghosts, but we carry around with us inner ghosts that are actually more. And so interesting, because right now I think we're the American psyche is meeting its inner ghost, if you will, and we're to have these difficult inner monologues with ourselves about where we are and where we're going. So even though the piece was not originally intended for the program, it fits in very nicely. But both of those poems are a little bit dark. They're a little angsty, and they bring up the feels, as my high school students would say. And so as a sort of cool glass of water, in response to these, we perform a setting of Anne Bradstreet's "Under the Cooling Shadow of the Stately Elm," which is it's like a 6-line poem. It's just lovely, and it just basically talks about, you find this beautiful place in nature, and if only you could, it's so idealized that once you sit there, you think, I just want to stay here forever. And we've all had that moment. And I think it's a moment of repose, quite literally. And it's by a wonderful female composer and good friend and mentor of mine, Dr. Charlene Archerbeck. Of course, Anne Bradstreet herself is a North Shore poet, so it's a wonderful point. And those are the ways that we're exploring, in a sense, the American psyche.
Well, it sounds like such an imaginative and timely concert, Jason. And we do live in fraught times, and I think everybody is thinking about who are we as a people? What are our dreams? What are our values, our ideals? And your program sounds like it is finely attuned to help to provide assistance with that process, using history, using music, using poetry, in order to help us frame the questions that we need to pose and think about what our answers are. So, in your program notes, then, you pose the question, is belief in the ideal of America futile, or can we individually and collectively seek ways to realize the more perfect union written about in our Constitution? So, Jason, two questions, and what do you think the music says, and what do you say?
You know, Mary, it's a difficult question. That's maybe the whole reason for doing the concert.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer. I mean, I have to be honest. Sometimes I turn on the news, and my hope in that ideal feels like a fool's errand. Sometimes I do worry, but then I'm reminded that the reason some of this repertoire and some of these poems exist was because we've been in moments like this before as a country, and hopefully it's not the last time we will have to face tricky questions, but we've always managed to come out the other side of it stronger, more bonded, striving more, as you said, toward that more perfect union, whatever that means, that kind of elusive phrase. So I think what the repertoire says is there's nothing wrong with celebrating America. There's nothing wrong with being proud of our heritage, considering the beauty of the country, considering the absolute amazing ideals that are set out in our Constitution that so many around the world look to as a framework, but admitting to ourselves that we're certainly not there yet, and that part of achieving the American dream is constantly striving for it. And I think the repertoire tells us that we need to continue this work. And how do we continue the work? Not by beating each other over the head with it, but ultimately by becoming more empathetic humans. By considering what it's like to walk in the shoes of someone else in our country, because we are defined by our diversity, and it should be seen as a strength and not as a disadvantage, though it certainly presents challenges, no doubt. And I think it suggests to us that that in working together and doing the hard work, asking the hard questions, that's how we're going to ultimately achieve the dream. The last bit of the concert is entitled "The American Dream Restored?" ? And it presents the last verse of America the Beautiful, which includes "Mend thine every flaw" and so on, and Aaron Copland's "The Promise of Living," which again, it's a promise. It's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
And what I love about that, it's from the opera "The Tenderland," and it's about the power of community and the power of getting down there in the dirt, as it were, getting your hands dirty, doing the hard work, pushing the plow together, sowing and collecting the crops. Again, it's kind of American and country bumpkin in its way, but I think it's a perfect ending for this concert because it's aspirational. It asks us it's not going to come if we just stick our heads in the sand.
Yeah.
It's not going to come if we shout at each other. It's going to come by sort of working together. And I do believe that's the way forward, and I hope we'll get there together somehow.
Yeah, incredibly well put, Jason. Thank you for that. Yeah. I'm wanting to find out now, is there anything about the concert that I haven't asked you yet that you want people to know about?
I guess what I want to say is that it's impossible to present a concert on what it means to be American in this time without it having sort of political overtones. And what I'll say is that while some of the repertoire has political implications, it's not a political event. It's not meant to be a political event. It's meant to be, as I said, offering an opportunity for conversation. And I think, we're being kind of brave because we're really trying to thread a certain needle with great care, where we are able to use our voices to shine a light on some of the difficult things that are happening without being heavy-handed or preachy.
Yeah.
And without, again, telling people how they should feel about these things, just giving them the space to think about it. So I think we've threaded the needle successfully, but I think, our audience's reaction, which could be varied, honestly, will ultimately determine whether we've been successful in threading that needle. Yeah. And, if we haven't threaded it quite right, I think, that's us, again, striving toward that perfect union. It's not for lack of trying to really find a way to put something which is connected to politics out there without being overtly political.
Yeah.
So I would encourage folks if they're thinking, oh, the last thing I want right now is to be in a concert that's going to make me, mad or think about it. It's not, that's not what the concert is. The concert really is a celebration, but it's a celebration, let's say, with open eyes,
Yeah.
and a celebration that invites reflection.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful.
I hope we'll all come out
Yeah.
and hear it. It'll be great.
Well, that's beautifully put. And one of the things you say in your program notes is that music is a healing force. And I think that that so many of us are feeling the need for any kind of healing that we can find. It's also true, I've been rewatching. I don't know if you ever watched the excellent HBO John Adams miniseries. Well, I just was rewatching the first couple of episodes, and what struck me was how much dissension there was about what are we going to do, and they were all in disagreement with one another. It's kind of suspenseful. Are they going to get this Declaration of Independence together? Are they going to be able to? But the fundamental question was that they were struggling with, and I think it's maybe part of American history, maybe we'll always struggle with them, but we're there now, in my opinion anyway, we're struggling with it. Everything you've been talking about is the American dream is what we decide together that it's going to be. And there will be different interpretations of that, but hopefully there will be some fundamental kind of goodwill and a certain level of values that we can agree upon are good, and we can build toward that. And music is an important tool in being able to help us, as you've been describing so eloquently, Jason, to question ourselves and to come together and have a shared emotional experience, which is also what music beautifully and brilliantly does, perhaps better than any other art. And in that shared emotional experience, find some common ground to make decisions we can come together and support about, this is who we want to be as a country. This is how we can live and be happy and respect one another and move forward and progress toward whatever current definition we've decided is what it means to be a more perfect union. The phrase itself indicating that we're never there, we're always working towards it. So it sounds like a wonderful concert. I'm happy to report I have my tickets already. And I just want to repeat, the concert will take place on May 10th in Beverly at St. Peter's Episcopal Church, and here in Newburyport at 4 p.m. on Sunday, May 11th at St. Paul's Episcopal Church on High Street. Jason, thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show and to talk through the concert, the program, and how and why you've imagined it, the amazing and disparate works that you brought together to help us heal and reflect and perhaps come up with some of our own answers and perhaps some shared answers with the fundamental questions that you're posing about what is the American dream or dreams. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much. As always, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. We're out of time for today. That's it for now. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Until then, everybody, please be well.